Too big to breed, marked for slaughter, the Apache Giantess was sold for meat until a cowboy claimed the sun rose slowly over the wide, dusty fields of the ranch, casting a warm golden light on the long grass and the scattered wooden fences. The wind carried the scent of dry earth and hay, and the occasional sound of distant cattle calls filled the morning air. On this ranch, life was simple but hard. Every day began before sunrise, and every day ended long after the last chores were done. The ranch had its share of challenges, but none was as unusual or as troubling as the giant cow known as the Apache Giantess. She stood apart from the rest of the herd, towering above them. Her muscles were strong and broad, her coat a deep dark brown that glistened faintly in the morning light. Even her eyes seemed larger than normal, reflecting intelligence and calmness. Workers often whispered about her unusual size, shaking their heads as she moved through the pastures with a slow, deliberate grace. She was unlike any other cow they had ever seen. Some called her a miracle of nature, while others saw her as a burden. The ranch had a long history of raising cattle for beef, and every animal was expected to earn its keep. The Apache Giantess, though impressive, had never been able to breed successfully. She had been paired with several bulls over the years, but none had produced offspring. For the ranch owner, this meant she was more of a liability than an asset. She ate more than any ordinary cow, and her sheer size made her difficult to manage. Every time she wandered into the feeding area, she seemed to take what felt like double or triple portions, leaving less for the others. The ranch hands often joked about her, but their humor was tinged with unease. Some of them respected her size and strength, quietly admiring the calm way she handled herself. Others were frustrated by the extra work she required. Moving her from one field to another was never simple. Her massive body could barely fit through the narrow gates, and her hooves sometimes damaged the wooden fences. Even leading her required planning, patience, and careful timing. Despite her challenges, she never caused harm to anyone, and she rarely panicked. There was a quiet dignity in her movements that made people stop and watch. The ranch owner, Mr. Collins, had been thinking about the Apache Giantess for weeks. Business had been slow, and money was tight. Every year the cost of running the ranch seemed to rise, and every animal had to justify its existence. Mr. Collins walked through the fields early one morning, looking at the herd grazing peacefully in the sun. He paused when he saw the giantess chewing grass near the fence. He sighed, running a hand over his face. "She's too big for this," he muttered to himself. Too big to breed, too expensive to feed. Maybe it's time to let her go. His thoughts were practical, but there was a hint of sorrow in his tone. He had always admired the giantess, but admiration did not pay the bills. The workers who overheard him nodded quietly. They had suspected for some time that she might be sent to the slaughterhouse. Some felt guilty for even thinking about it, while others accepted it as part of ranch life. On a ranch, decisions like these were not easy, but they were often necessary. Over the next few days, preparations began. The ranch hands cleaned the pens and checked the trailer. They spoke in hushed voices about the day ahead. The Apache Giantess, as always, remained calm. She wandered from one patch of grass to another, chewing slowly, seemingly unaware of the conversation around her. But those who had spent time with her knew she was more aware than she let on. Her eyes followed the movements of the humans, and her ears twitched at the smallest sound. There was a quiet intelligence in her demeanor, a presence that made people feel as though she understood everything. Even though the plan was practical, it weighed heavily on some of the ranch hands. Javier, a young man who had grown up on the ranch, often paused when he saw her. He remembered watching her as a calf, how quickly she had grown, how gentle she had always been. He remembered how she had survived a harsh winter when many other cows had struggled. She had been strong and resilient, a creature who had endured hardships without complaint. Now, the thought of her being taken to the slaughterhouse filled him with unease. "You think she knows?" Javier asked one of the older hands, Rick, as they loaded hay into the trailer. Rick shrugged. "Cows don't think like we do," he said. "But she knows something's coming. Animals always do." Javier frowned, watching the giantess as she walked slowly across the field. There was a calmness in her step, but also a certain heaviness, as though she sensed that her life was about to change. He wondered what it would feel like for someone to take her away, for her to leave the only place she had ever known. The thought made him uneasy. He had always respected her strength, but now he felt something deeper, an empathy that he could not shake. As the day of her transport approached, the ranch buzzed with activity. Gates were reinforced, equipment was checked, and the workers prepared for the journey. The Apache Giantess continued her routine, grazing quietly and watching the humans with steady eyes. She was patient, yet there was an air of expectancy in the way she moved. It was as if she knew that her life was about to change forever. The morning of the journey arrived. The sun was barely above the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields. The ranch hands approached the giantess cautiously, speaking softly to her as they guided her toward the trailer. Her large frame made the process slow and careful. Every step had to be measured, every movement planned. There was no room for haste. Javier walked beside her, holding the rope loosely, not to control her but to guide her gently. "Easy now," he whispered. The giantess responded by moving calmly, her massive body swaying slightly as she walked. The other workers followed behind, keeping a watchful eye. It was a tense, quiet journey, and the weight of what was about to happen hung heavily in the air. Finally, they reached the trailer. It was just large enough to contain her, but she had to bend her head slightly to fit comfortably. The workers helped guide her in, speaking in soft, reassuring tones. She stepped in without panic, her calm presence making the process smoother than anyone had expected. Still, there was a feeling of finality, a sense that this moment was a turning point in her life. As the doors of the trailer closed, Javier paused for a moment, looking at her through the small opening. "Take care," he whispered, though he knew she could not understand his words in human language. There was a sadness in his voice, a recognition that she was about to leave the only home she had ever known. The Apache Giantess stood quietly inside the trailer, her dark eyes reflecting the sunlight as the vehicle began to move. The fields she had known for years slowly disappeared behind her, and she faced the unknown. Though she could not speak, there was a sense of awareness in her gaze, a silent understanding of the journey ahead. She was calm, but her presence filled the small space with dignity and strength. As the trailer moved down the dusty road, the workers fell silent. Some looked away, unwilling to watch, while others kept their eyes on her, silently acknowledging the quiet majesty of the creature they had raised. The ranch, once filled with her massive presence, now felt strangely empty. The wind carried the scent of grass and hay, but it could not fill the space left by the giantess. In that moment, it was clear to everyone that the Apache Giantess was more than just a cow. She was a symbol of resilience, of quiet strength, and of the complexities of life on a ranch. She had lived through hardships, grown larger and stronger than anyone expected, and now faced a new challenge. Her journey was not just about survival. It was about the dignity she carried with her, the silent lessons she imparted to those around her. The trailer rolled on, and the giantess stood tall, her presence commanding even in the confined space. She was about to face a future uncertain and frightening, but she did so with calmness and grace. The workers, too, would carry the memory of her strength with them, a reminder that some lives are too remarkable to forget. And so, the Apache Giantess began her journey into the unknown, a creature too large to breed, marked for slaughter, yet carrying with her the quiet power of life itself. Her story, already legendary among the ranch hands, was only beginning, and it would touch more lives than anyone could have imagined. The trailer bounced and rattled along the dirt road as the Apache Giantess stood quietly inside, her massive body pressed slightly against the walls. The sunlight streamed through the slats, casting patterns across her dark coat, and the sound of hooves and wheels clanging filled the small space. She did not panic, but her breathing was slow and steady, almost as if she understood the journey she was on and accepted it with calm dignity. The ranch hands had spoken of her intelligence before, but now as they watched her through the small openings in the trailer, it was impossible not to feel it. She was aware of her surroundings, of the movement and the noise, of the world changing around her. The journey to the slaughterhouse seemed longer than anyone had anticipated. The roads were uneven and dusty, and every bump caused the trailer to jolt. Javier, who had insisted on accompanying her to ensure she remained calm, held the side of the trailer, speaking softly, as if he could reach her with his voice. "Almost there," he murmured. "Just a little further. You're doing fine." The giantess shifted her weight slightly but remained steady, her enormous eyes meeting his briefly. There was a connection in that glance, a silent understanding that transcended words. The other workers were less sentimental. They focused on the task at hand, checking the trailer, adjusting the ropes, and making sure the ride was smooth. To them, she was still, first and foremost, an animal destined for meat. Yet even they could not ignore the sense of respect that seemed to follow her. Some muttered to each other about her size, her strength, and the unusual calm she carried. "Never seen anything like her," one said. "She's big enough to pull this whole trailer by herself if she wanted." The others nodded, but no one argued. She had a presence that demanded attention, even in silence. As the trailer moved through the rolling hills, the landscape changed. The fields of the ranch gave way to open plains, and the distant mountains rose against the sky. The sun climbed higher, heating the trailer and filling it with a warm, dusty air. The giantess did not flinch, but she shifted occasionally, adjusting her massive legs to keep balanced. Her breathing remained steady, her eyes calm and alert. Javier watched her closely, amazed at her composure. He had seen many animals frightened by trailers, but she moved as though she were in command of the journey itself. Hours passed, and with every mile Javier's unease grew. He had accompanied animals before, but never one like this. She was not just large, she was extraordinary, a creature whose presence made people pause. He thought about the ranch and the life she had known there, about the days spent grazing peacefully, about the quiet mornings where she had stood alone in the sunlight. It was hard to imagine her confined in the cold industrial place that awaited her at the end of the road. The slaughterhouse was a place Javier had visited only once before. The memory made him uneasy even now. The smell of blood, the sounds of frightened animals, the cold efficiency of the workers, it all lingered in his mind. He hoped that the Apache Giantess would not panic, that she would somehow sense his presence and the care he was giving her. She had survived much in her life, but this was a challenge unlike any other. As the trailer approached the outskirts of the slaughterhouse, a sense of tension filled the air. The workers spoke in low voices, preparing for what they expected to be routine. They measured her weight, calculated the cost, and spoke in practical terms about the efficiency of processing her meat. To them she was a commodity, a large and profitable animal. But even among them there was a whisper of awe. She was unlike any cow they had ever seen. Her muscles were strong, her coat glossy, and her eyes intelligent. She carried herself with a quiet authority that made even the most experienced workers hesitate. When the trailer finally stopped, the doors were opened, and the Apache Giantess was guided out. She stepped carefully, her large hooves sinking slightly into the dirt of the holding pen. Javier stayed close, speaking softly, patting her massive flank to reassure her. The workers moved around her with practiced efficiency, but it was clear that everyone was aware of her unusual presence. There was a silence, a pause, as if the world itself recognized that this was not an ordinary animal. The Apache Giantess looked around, taking in the unfamiliar sights and sounds. The pens were smaller than her pastures. The air smelled different, and the distant sounds of other animals created an unfamiliar rhythm. Yet she did not panic. Her calmness was striking, and it seemed to affect those around her. Even the workers who had come expecting just another animal to process were now watching her closely, as if they were witnessing something rare and significant. As the day wore on, Javier stayed near the pen, unwilling to leave her alone. He had grown attached to her during the journey, and he could not shake the feeling that sending her into the slaughterhouse was wrong. He watched as she grazed from a small patch of feed, her massive body moving gracefully despite the confinement. She seemed to understand that she was in a different world now, and she adapted with quiet resilience. One of the workers approached Javier, noting the attachment he seemed to have for the Apache Giantess. "You really care about this one, huh?" he asked. Javier nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "She's not just another cow," he said. "There's something about her, something I can't explain." She's special. The worker laughed softly. Special or not, she's still meat at the end of the day. Javier frowned but did not argue. He knew the reality of ranch life, but his heart ached at the thought of her fate. Even as the day ended, the Apache Giantess remained calm. She lay down for a moment, resting her massive body, then stood again, her eyes scanning the pen. Javier watched her closely, feeling a growing determination. He could not let her face this fate without trying to find another way. There had to be a chance to save her, to give her the life she deserved. Night fell over the slaughterhouse, and the lights cast long shadows across the pens. The Apache Giantess stood quietly, her large frame silhouetted against the artificial glow. Javier stayed nearby, refusing to leave her alone. He thought about the ranch, about the mornings and evenings spent in the sun, and about the quiet dignity she carried. There was a lesson in her presence, a reminder that even in the face of danger, strength and calm could prevail. As the workers began their preparations for the next day, Javier made a decision. He would not abandon her. He would find a way to give her a second chance, to rescue her from the fate that awaited her. He did not know how he would do it, but he knew it had to be done. The Apache Giantess had survived much already, and she deserved more than the cold efficiency of the slaughterhouse. The night was quiet, filled only with the occasional sounds of other animals and the faint hum of machinery. The Apache Giantess stood silently in her pen, her eyes reflecting the soft light. She had been through so much already, and yet she remained calm, patient, and aware. Javier watched her, feeling a deep respect and a growing sense of responsibility. He could not let her story end here. In the darkness of the slaughterhouse, a plan began to form. Javier would find a way to save the Apache Giantess, to give her a new life where she could be safe and respected. She was too remarkable, too extraordinary to be treated as nothing more than meat. Her strength, her calm, and her quiet intelligence demanded more. And Javier, moved by compassion and determination, vowed that he would not fail her. By the time the first light of dawn touched the pens, Javier had made up his mind. He would take every step necessary to ensure that the Apache Giantess survived. The journey she had begun in the trailer was only part of her story. Her courage, her patience, and her quiet strength would carry her further than anyone had imagined. And with Javier's help, she might finally find the life she deserved, a life of safety, respect, and dignity. The next morning, the sun rose over the quiet slaughterhouse, casting long shadows across the pens. The Apache Giantess stood calmly in her enclosure, her dark coat shining faintly in the early light. Javier was already there, leaning against the fence, his eyes following her every movement. He could see the intelligence in her gaze, the quiet strength that had always set her apart. Even in the unfamiliar and cold surroundings of the slaughterhouse, she carried herself with dignity. Javier had spent the night thinking. He could not let her life end here. There had to be another way. But what could one man do against the rules of the slaughterhouse, against the plans that had already been made? He felt a growing sense of urgency, knowing that the longer he waited, the smaller his chance would become. And yet, he also knew that acting too quickly without a plan could backfire. He needed a solution, and he needed it soon. As he watched, a truck pulled up to the facility. From the cab stepped a man in worn jeans, a leather vest, and a wide-brimmed hat. He moved with the ease of someone who knew ranches and cattle, his boots crunching softly on the gravel. Javier watched curiously, wondering who this man could be. The man approached the pens with a calm confidence, carrying a small bag that rattled slightly with every step. The Apache Giantess lifted her massive head and watched him. Her ears twitched slightly, and for a moment it was as if she recognized something in him. Javier felt a surge of hope. There was a connection here, something instinctive and unspoken. The man stopped at her pen and leaned on the fence, studying her carefully. He did not make sudden movements or loud noises. Instead, he spoke softly, almost to himself, as he looked at her. "Well, aren't you a sight?" he said quietly, a smile forming beneath his hat. "You're something else, that's for sure." The giantess blinked slowly, tilting her head as she regarded him. Javier could see that she was calm, not startled, not frightened. There was a stillness in her posture that suggested she was choosing to trust this stranger, at least for now. Javier's heart lifted. Perhaps this man could help her. Perhaps he was the person who could offer her the second chance she deserved. The man noticed Javier watching and gave a small nod.
"I see you care about her," he said. "That's good."
She deserves someone who understands. Javier nodded. "She's not just any cow," he said. "She's special. She's been through a lot, and she deserves better than this." The man chuckled softly, reaching into his bag and pulling out a small container of feed. He knelt down near the fence and sprinkled some toward the Apache Giantess. Her nostrils flared as she sniffed it. Then she took a cautious step forward and began to eat. The man spoke gently as she ate, his voice low and soothing. Javier watched, amazed. It was clear that she trusted him almost immediately, responding to his calm presence in a way that few humans had ever managed. "I've seen cattle like her before," the man said after a moment, standing and brushing dust from his hands. "Big, strong, unusual. But this one, she's remarkable." "Too big to breed, you say?" Javier nodded. "Yes. She's never produced a calf. And because of her size, she eats more than she produces. The ranch owner wants to send her to the slaughterhouse." The man's eyes darkened with concern. "That won't do," he said firmly. "She's too remarkable to end up like that. I can help. If we move quickly, I think there's a chance she can have a new life." Javier felt hope rising inside him. "Can you really save her?" he asked. The man smiled, though it was tinged with seriousness. "I've done it before," he said, "but it won't be easy. You'll need to trust me, and she'll need to trust us both." For the next hour, the man observed the Apache Giantess carefully. He studied her movements, the way she stood, the way she shifted her weight, and the way she responded to Javier's presence. He spoke softly, coaxing her closer to the fence, encouraging her to follow him with gentle gestures. Javier could see that she was beginning to respond, her calm demeanor allowing the man to guide her without fear or resistance. Finally, he turned to Javier. "If we act today, we can take her to my ranch," he said. "It's a bit of a drive, but it's safe. She'll have space, proper feed, and care. She won't have to worry about being judged or sent away. But we have to move quickly. The slaughterhouse will start their work soon." Javier nodded eagerly. "Whatever you need me to do, I'll do it." The man smiled and clapped a hand on Javier's shoulder. "Good. We'll do this together." They spent the next hour preparing for the move. The man instructed Javier to lead the Apache Giantess gently toward a larger, reinforced trailer that he had brought with him. Unlike the standard trailer used by the slaughterhouse, this one was designed to carry large and unusual animals safely. It had wider gates, stronger flooring, and enough space for her to stand comfortably. The Apache Giantess followed cautiously at first, her massive body moving slowly as she adjusted to the new trailer. The man spoke softly, guiding her with calm words and gentle gestures. Javier stayed close, whispering encouragement, while the others watched with a mixture of curiosity and admiration. Even the workers who had accepted her fate could not help but be impressed by the way she moved, responding to care and trust rather than fear and force. Once she was inside the trailer, the man checked the doors and made sure she had room to adjust. The Apache Giantess looked around, sniffing the air, then lowered her head slightly, as if acknowledging the new arrangement. Javier felt a surge of relief. For the first time in her life, she was not being pushed or forced. She had space, security, and people who cared. The drive to the man's ranch was long but uneventful. The Apache Giantess remained calm, standing steadily as the trailer moved over hills and along dusty roads. Javier rode alongside the trailer, talking softly to her and keeping her reassured. The man drove carefully, adjusting speed and brakes to minimize bumps and jolts. The quiet teamwork between the two humans and the cow was remarkable. It was a journey built on trust, patience, and understanding, and every mile strengthened the bond between them. As the sun began to set, they arrived at the ranch. It was a smaller place than the Apache Giantess had known, but it was peaceful, with wide open pastures and sturdy fences. The man opened the trailer, allowing her to step onto the soft grass. She paused for a moment, lifting her head to take in the new surroundings. The air smelled fresh, and the space stretched out before her like a promise. Slowly she stepped forward, her massive hooves pressing into the soft earth. She wandered a few steps, then stopped, looking back at Javier and the man. "You did well," the man said softly. "This is your home now." Javier smiled, tears threatening in his eyes. "You're safe," he whispered. "You'll never have to worry again." The Apache Giantess lowered her head, grazing gently on the grass. Her massive body moved gracefully, her calm presence filling the field. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was a quiet, beautiful moment, the end of a difficult journey and the beginning of a new chapter. Neighbors began to hear about the remarkable cow, and soon people came to see her. They were amazed by her size, her strength, and her calm demeanor. She became something of a local legend, not just for her size, but for the story of how she had been saved from the slaughterhouse. Javier and the man shared her story with anyone who asked, emphasizing the importance of compassion and understanding and caring for animals. The Apache Giantess adapted quickly to her new life. She had more space than she had ever known, proper food, and people who respected her. She still could not breed, but that no longer mattered. She was valued for her presence, her strength, and the lessons she imparted simply by existing. Her story became a symbol of hope and kindness, showing that even in situations where life seemed bleak, compassion could make a difference. As weeks turned into months, she thrived. Her coat grew shinier, her muscles stronger, and her calm nature became even more pronounced. Javier and the man worked together to ensure she was healthy and happy, watching her movements, caring for her needs, and learning from her resilience. Visitors marveled at her size and the story behind her survival. Children who came to the ranch would stand in awe, whispering about the giant cow who had been saved. Through it all, the Apache Giantess remained dignified, calm, and aware. She had survived hardships, faced the threat of slaughter, and emerged into a new life full of safety and care. Her story continued to touch the hearts of everyone who met her, proving that even in the most difficult circumstances, one act of kindness could change the course of a life. The Apache Giantess stepped off the trailer, her enormous hooves sinking slightly into the soft earth of the new ranch. The sunlight bathed the fields in a warm glow, and the air smelled of fresh grass and flowers, a stark contrast to the harsh metallic scent of the slaughterhouse. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, she seemed relaxed. She paused and looked around, taking in the wide-open pastures and sturdy fences that stretched as far as her eyes could see. The space was new, yet comforting, and she moved with a slow, deliberate grace, testing her legs on the soft ground. The cowboy who had saved her, Thomas, stood nearby, watching carefully. He had spent many years working with cattle, but he had never encountered one like her. Her size, strength, and calm intelligence made her remarkable. He spoke softly as he approached her, his voice steady and kind. "Easy now," he said, holding out a hand. "This is your home. You are safe here." Javier, who had accompanied her from the slaughterhouse, stayed close as well. He could not help but smile, watching her explore the new pasture. "She's amazing," he said quietly. "I've never seen anything like her." Thomas nodded.
She is, and she deserves all the care we can give her.
"She's not just big, she's strong, smart, and patient. We need to make sure she knows this is a safe place."
Over the next few hours, the Apache Giantess wandered the pasture, familiarizing herself with her surroundings.
She sniffed at the grass, examined the fences, and tested the small stream that ran along one side of the field. She seemed to understand the limits of the space and moved cautiously near the edges, making sure she would not get trapped or hurt. Thomas and Javier followed her at a distance, speaking softly, offering encouragement, and making sure she felt secure. The first challenge was feeding her properly. She was enormous, larger than any cow Thomas had ever raised, and her diet needed careful attention. She required more food than the other cattle, but it had to be balanced to maintain her health. Over the next few days, Thomas experimented with different feeding methods. giving her plenty of hay, grains, and fresh water. She adapted quickly, eating steadily, her calm presence filling the pasture with a sense of order and peace. As the days passed, the Apache Giantess became more comfortable with her new home. She learned where the best grass grew, where the shade was strongest, and where she could rest without being disturbed. Thomas and Javier watched with admiration as she explored the far corners of the ranch, moving with confidence that reflected both her strength and her intelligence. It was clear that she had been through hardships, but she had survived and adapted, proving her resilience. Visitors soon began to hear about the remarkable cow. Neighbors and local farmers came to see her, curious about the story they had heard. She was too big to breed, but her size and calm demeanor made her fascinating. Children would stand at the fence, eyes wide with wonder, whispering to each other about the giant cow who had been saved. Thomas and Javier shared her story, emphasizing the care and respect she now received. Some visitors doubted her size at first, thinking the stories must be exaggerated. But when they saw her in person, they were amazed. She towered over other cows, her muscles strong and her coat glossy. Her eyes seemed to follow everyone, calm and intelligent. There was a sense of presence about her, a quiet authority that made people pause and watch. Thomas noticed that she seemed to recognize people who treated her with kindness. She would approach those who spoke softly and offered gentle gestures, while she remained cautious around those who were loud or sudden in their movements. Her behavior was remarkable for a cow, and it further strengthened the bond between her and the humans who cared for her. Javier spent hours observing her. Learning from her calmness and patience, he realized that she had taught him something important about resilience. Despite her size and strength, she moved with gentleness and awareness. She had survived harsh conditions, been marked for slaughter, and yet remained calm, patient, and intelligent. Watching her, Javier felt a deep respect and a growing sense of responsibility. He had helped save her, but she was teaching him how to appreciate strength that was quiet and enduring rather than aggressive or loud. Over the weeks, the Apache Giantess adapted fully to her new life. She had regular meals, clean water, and plenty of space to move. Thomas built additional shelters and shaded areas to ensure she could rest comfortably during hot days. She grew stronger, her muscles more defined, her movements more confident. Yet her calm demeanor never changed. She seemed to understand that this was a safe place, that she was no longer in danger, and that she could live her life without fear. The ranch itself began to feel different with her presence. The other cattle seemed to recognize her as something special. They gave her space, grazing at a distance, while she moved through the pasture with dignity. Her calmness seemed to influence the entire herd, creating an atmosphere of order and balance. Even the ranch workers, who had come to see her as just another animal, began to treat her with a newfound respect. Thomas and Javier decided to document her growth and behavior. They took careful notes on her feeding habits, movements, and interactions with the other animals. Visitors were allowed to watch her from a safe distance, learning about her story and observing her strength and intelligence. She became not only a symbol of resilience but also an example of how animals could thrive when treated with care and respect. Over time, the Apache Giantess developed a routine. Mornings were spent grazing and exploring the pasture, while afternoons were reserved for rest in the shaded areas. Evenings brought quiet moments, with the sun setting over the rolling hills, casting a golden glow over the field. She would stand still, surveying the land, her calm presence a source of peace for those who watched her. Thomas often reflected on the journey that had brought her here. He remembered the first moment he saw her at the slaughterhouse, the way she had remained calm despite the chaos around her. He had recognized something extraordinary in her then, and he felt grateful that he had been able to give her a second chance. Javier shared these thoughts, and together they felt a deep connection to her, one that went beyond the usual bonds between humans and animals. The Apache Giantess had also begun to show small signs of personality. She would approach Thomas and Javier when she wanted attention, rubbing her massive head against them in a gentle gesture. She would nudge the smaller cows away from certain areas, asserting her presence without aggression. Her intelligence was evident in the way she navigated her environment, remembering where the best grass was and how to avoid hazards. As the seasons changed, so did the ranch. Rain nourished the fields, and the Apache Giantess adapted to wet and dry conditions alike. She was resilient, moving through mud and puddles with the same calm dignity she had always shown. She became a symbol for the ranch, a reminder that strength, patience, and care could overcome adversity. Visitors continued to come, bringing children and neighbors to see her. They learned about her past and marveled at her size and intelligence. Many were inspired to treat their own animals with greater care, understanding that compassion could make a profound difference in an animal's life. The Apache Giantess, too large to breed and once marked for slaughter, had become a teacher without words, showing the world the power of patience, resilience, and respect. In the quiet evenings, Thomas and Javier would often stand near her, watching as she grazed and rested. They felt a deep sense of satisfaction and connection. She had survived the impossible and found a life where she was valued, safe, and respected. Her story was far from over, but it had already left a mark on everyone who encountered her. Through it all, the Apache Giantess remained calm and dignified. She had faced hardship, danger, and uncertainty, yet she moved forward with patience and quiet strength. She had been saved by the kindness of one man and the dedication of another, and she had responded by thriving in her new life. Her story became a legend in the local area, a testament to what could happen when compassion and understanding guided human actions. The Apache Giantess had found her place, and in doing so she had given the people around her a gift. She taught them about resilience, patience, and the quiet strength that comes from living with dignity. She had been too large to breed, too unusual to fit expectations, and nearly lost to the world. But in her new home she flourished, proving that even those who seem out of place can find their purpose and make a difference. Years had passed since the Apache Giantess first stepped onto Thomas's ranch. Time had changed her, in ways both visible and quiet. Her dark brown coat now carried streaks of silver, a sign of her age and experience. Her muscles remained strong, though her movements were slower, more deliberate. She had grown into her environment, learning every inch of the wide pastures, the small stream that ran along the edge of the property, and the quiet woods nearby where she liked to stand in shade during the hot afternoons. She had become more than a remarkable cow. She had become a symbol of survival and dignity. Javier still visited regularly. He had grown alongside the giantess, learning patience, compassion, and the meaning of responsibility. Watching her, he had come to understand that strength was not always loud or aggressive. It was calm, steady, and unwavering. He often thought back to the first day they had brought her to the ranch from the slaughterhouse. The memory still brought a mixture of relief and awe. They had saved her life, but it was she who had taught them lessons about resilience, courage, and trusted. Thomas, the cowboy who had recognized her value when no one else did, had dedicated much of his time to ensuring she thrived. He had built larger shelters, reinforced the fences, and provided her with the best care possible. Over the years, word of her survival and remarkable size had spread. People came from neighboring towns curious to see the Apache Giantess, who had been too large to breed, too remarkable to forget, and once marked for slaughter. She had become a legend not only for her size but for the story of how a single act of kindness had changed her fate. Children were often the most fascinated. They would approach the fence, wide-eyed, whispering to each other about the giant cow who had been saved. Some were nervous at first, unsure how to react to an animal so much larger than themselves. But the Apache Giantess had a gentle way of communicating. She would lower her massive head slowly, sniffing their hands or letting them brush her fur. Her calm demeanor reassured them, teaching them that respect and patience were the right ways to interact with those who were different or extraordinary. Visitors would often ask Thomas how it had all begun, and he would tell the story from the start. The ranch, the decision to send her to the slaughterhouse, and the quiet determination that had led him to save her. He emphasized the lessons she had brought into their lives. It wasn't just her size or her intelligence, he explained, but her resilience, her patience, and the dignity with which she carried herself. Every life, he said, deserved respect and compassion, no matter how unusual or challenging it might seem. The Apache Giantess herself seemed to understand her role. She no longer wandered aimlessly or acted cautiously as she had in the early days. Instead, she moved with authority, knowing where she could rest, where the best grass grew, and how to navigate the ranch safely. Other cows gave her space, recognizing her as a presence to respect rather than fear. Even the ranch workers, who had once considered her a burden, now treated her with reverence. She had earned a place not just in the pasture, but in the hearts of everyone who knew her story. Javier often thought about the moments when her life had hung in the balance. He remembered the trailer ride, the tension, the uncertainty. He remembered the first time Thomas had appeared, speaking softly, offering trust and care. And now, years later, the Apache Giantess had not only survived, but had flourished. She had become a living testament to what compassion, patience, and determination could achieve. Despite her age, she retained her intelligence and awareness. She could sense when someone approached quietly, recognizing those who were kind and cautious. She seemed to remember each person who had played a role in her rescue and her new life. Sometimes, when she rested under the shade of the trees, she would look toward the distant fields, as if reflecting on the life she had left behind. It was impossible to know exactly what she thought, but those who watched her believed she carried memories of the past in the quiet dignity of her presence. Thomas and Javier continued to care for her carefully, adjusting her diet to match her age, providing softer bedding in her resting areas, and ensuring she had plenty of water and shade. They noticed small changes, slower steps, longer periods of rest, and a quieter demeanor, but these were natural signs of her maturity. Even as she aged, she remained remarkable. Her size, her strength, and her calm authority continued to impress anyone who saw her. She was no longer simply an animal. She was a teacher, in silence, showing lessons in patience, dignity, and resilience. One day, a local newspaper caught wind of the story and sent a reporter to the ranch. They wanted to write about the Apache Giantess, the cow who had been saved from slaughter and had become a symbol in the community. The reporter was amazed when they arrived. The cow towered over the others in the pasture, moving gracefully despite her massive size. She lowered her head and sniffed at the reporter's hand, gentle and calm, as if acknowledging the curiosity and respect in the human visitors. The article was published, and soon more people came to see her. Her story spread beyond the local community, inspiring others to treat animals with care and compassion. Schools even organized small trips for students to visit the ranch, where they could learn about animal welfare, resilience, and the power of kindness. The Apache Giantess, once nearly lost to the world, had become a teacher to thousands, all without speaking a single word. Her impact was not limited to humans. Other animals on the ranch also benefited from her presence. She moved through the pasture with quiet authority, creating order and calm among the other cows. When she approached, the herd adjusted, giving her space and respecting her presence. Even the younger animals seemed to learn from her example, adopting a quieter and more cautious behavior when she was near. Her influence extended beyond her own life, shaping the behavior of the entire herd. Javier often reflected on the lessons he had learned from her. He remembered the fear and tension of the slaughterhouse, the hope that Thomas had shown, and the calm strength of the Apache Giantess herself. He realized that life was full of unexpected challenges, but that courage, patience, and compassion could make a difference. Her survival had changed not only her own life, but the lives of those who had taken the time to care for her. As the years went on, Thomas and Javier made small improvements to the ranch to ensure she would always be safe and comfortable. They reinforced the fences, added extra shaded areas, and ensured she had access to the best food. They even built a special resting area near the stream, where she could lie down and enjoy the view of the fields. She used this area often, resting in the cool shade while the sun moved across the sky. It became a favorite spot for her, a place of comfort and peace. The Apache Giantess became more than just a cow. She became a symbol, a story to be shared and remembered. Her life inspired respect for animals, for nature, and for the quiet power of resilience. Visitors often left the ranch moved by her presence, understanding that she represented something more than size or strength. She represented the idea that even in difficult circumstances, life could be saved, nurtured, and celebrated. In her final years, the Apache Giantess continued to live with dignity and calm authority, She remained healthy for her age, her body strong though slower, her eyes clear and intelligent. She had endured hardship, survived near death, and emerged into a life of care and respect. Her story touched countless lives, reminding people of the importance of compassion, the value of patience, and the quiet strength that comes from living with dignity. When she passed away peacefully in her sleep, under the shade of her favorite trees, Thomas and Javier felt a profound loss but also gratitude. She had given them lessons that no human could teach. Lessons about strength, resilience, patience, and kindness. They held a small gathering on the ranch, telling her story to the visitors and workers who had come to know her. Children whispered softly about the giant cow who had been saved, and adults reflected on the lessons they had learned from her life. The Apache Giantess left behind a legacy. She had been too large to breed, too unusual to fit expectations, and once marked for slaughter. Yet she had survived, thrived, and inspired everyone who encountered her. Her life became a story to be told, a reminder that every living being deserved care, respect, and the chance to live fully. Her memory lived on in the fields of the ranch, in the hearts of Thomas and Javier, and in the minds of everyone who had witnessed her remarkable journey. Even long after she was gone, the story of the Apache Giantess remained. She had shown that life, when treated with patience, care, and understanding, could overcome even the harshest beginnings. She had been saved by compassion, nurtured by care, and remembered with admiration. And in every way that mattered, she had lived a life worth celebrating.